Good afternoon. Welcome to the Association for Clinical Oncology's annual Advocacy Summit. My name is Skip Burris, and I'm the chair of the association. It has been truly inspiring to see our volunteers rise to the occasion and join us virtually to advocate for our patients despite the challenges we face due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you for your commitment and for taking the time to participate in the summit. Once again, we have great participation from every part of ASCO's membership, with over 140 volunteers from more than 30 ASCO committees and work groups representing 44 states at this year's summit. In 2021, our summit focused on making telehealth flexibilities permanent, securing increased federal funding for the NIH and NCI, and protecting patients with cancer from harmful step therapy protocols and prior authorization. Due to your stalwart advocacy efforts last year, congressional support for our ask has increased. This year, we are building on the support we had in 2021 with the goal of getting our priorities across the finish line before this session of Congress adjourns. The fiscal year 2022 funding package recently signed into law provided funding increases for both the NIH and NCI. Additionally, since the beginning of the pandemic, when the Department of Health and Human Services lifted restrictions to telehealth use, we have advocated for making these flexibilities permanent. Congress recently approved an extension to keep the current telehealth flexibilities in place for 5 months after the expiration of the public health emergency, likely in July. While not the permanent extension that we've been requesting, this move means that Congress has heard us. Additionally, bills we support, some of which we'll be advocating for tomorrow, have advanced out of committee and been included in larger legislative packages, giving them a much greater chance of passing. Continued advocacy tomorrow for the remainder of 2022 and beyond is crucial to get our advocacy priorities realized on Capitol Hill. I'm pleased to share other exciting developments in the cancer research space. Congress recently approved funding for the establishment of the newly proposed Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or ARPA-H. We are excited to see what this agency might do for cancer research, with its goal of focusing on high-risk, high-reward translational medical research projects. The President and Dr. Jill Biden also announced they were reigniting the Cancer Moonshot Initiative earlier this year at a Rose Garden event attended by our ASCO CEO, Dr. Cliff Hudis, and our ASCO President, Dr. Lori Pierce. What will come of this reignited moonshot remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: we have strong allies in our fight against cancer. Even with these steps in the right direction, I cannot stress enough the importance of your ongoing engagement. ASCO puts significant time and resources into advancing comprehensive advocacy priorities in Congress through lobbying, grassroots outreach, and coalition building. ASCO's Government Relationship Committee develops advocacy priorities that reflect an ever-changing and at times difficult to navigate political environment. ASCO's lobbyists and regulatory staff advance our priorities on Capitol Hill and with the administration. But even with the hard work being done at ASCO, nothing compares to having you, the constituent and the oncology expert, share your perspectives directly with decision makers who are crafting policies and laws that enhance or impede our ability to care for patients. The next 2 days will prepare you on how best to advocate on behalf of ASCO, yourself, and your patients. We hope you use this and the grassroots training to hone your advocacy skills, learn more about ASCO's legislative priorities, and build or grow relationships with your members of Congress and their staff. We need you to lead, engage, and influence. Thank you for making and joining the Virtual Advocacy Summit and for your commitment to helping ASCO make the world a better place for people with cancer.
Dr. Marsland, we can turn it over to you for the PAC update.
Fantastic. So good afternoon. Thank you, Skip, and thank you to the group for allowing me to talk to you a little bit about your Political Action Committee. I'm Tom Marsland, and I am the chairman of the advisory committee to the Political Action Committee. The association board about 2 years ago sort of empowered us to form a Political Action Committee. So it's kind of been a challenge to get this up and going in the last 2 years due to the election cycles and the issues that have come up in the last 2 election cycle years. and also the fact that we're trying to do this in the middle of a COVID pandemic. But I think the reason it is crucial to our activities that the reason the board wanted to go ahead and move ahead with the PAC was to improve and increase our access to our elected officials. The Political Action Committee allows us to make contributions to folks who are important in the Cancer Committee. It allows us to meet with them on a kind of a more personal one-to-one basis and explain our positions, on many of the new issues that affect cancer and cancer care. I think it's important to meet with the officials, but as those of you who have been involved in this particular activity, excuse me. Thank you. Sorry. And it allows us to meet also with their advisors, their healthcare advisors, and a lot of times these are folks who are kind of young and junior people and may not be as aware of some of the issues that are important to us. So I think it's important that we have an opportunity to meet with these folks. So the Political Action Committee allows us to have a increased visibility and a louder voice dealing with these folks. I think we were very successful last year. Oh, thank you. I didn't even realize we had slides, but thank you for the slides. So yeah, we've raised significant amounts of money, $40,000 in our first year, and we raised $56,000 last year. And we actually made significant contributions. We were happy to have 102 folks contribute, and we're looking to continue to grow that. We're looking for 90,000 in 2022 and hoping to increase the donation members. And we have 140 ASCO members on this call, and we need 150. So if every one of us were to make a contribution, we're only 10 short of at least the PAC contributors. This election cycle are also, and I don't know if we have another slide. Okay, we're maybe moving ahead a little bit too fast. So anyway, so this election cycle, we've already made contributions of $42,000 to 24 elected officials. And I think we are truly ecumenical and non-denominational. We support both the R's and the D's. And the individuals that we try to support are basically legislators who are influential, affecting legislation important to us and to our patients. Specifically folks who are, on the committees that involve with, appropriations and healthcare, Senate Finance, Ways and Means, and others. Also, we tend to want to support individuals who are sponsoring and co-sponsoring legislation that are important to ASCO and the cancer world. One of the perfect examples of how the PAC can be helpful was this morning, and I hope you all had an opportunity to visit or attend the meeting with Senator Cassidy. It was really a great meeting, and kind of an interesting. The PAC allowed him to participate in us for funding some of his bills. He's been very supportive. Helped us with telehealth. He's helped us with prior auths. He's helped us with step therapy. And it was really interesting that obviously he's a physician and was really very knowledgeable about our issues. And really, we probably don't have a lot to educate him because he's a physician and he's quite knowledgeable. But he did make an important point, how it is important for us to be advocates, to be seen and to be heard. And the legislatures remember people who support them. He told a story which I think really illustrates it quite well. He talked about an anesthesia friend of his who took time out of his practice and was outside on the road, holding up a sign to, elect, Bill Cassidy to the Senate. And he kind of joked about how, he's in a meeting with the president and Joe called and he said, excuse me, Mr. President, I have to take this call. So I think the point is that the legislatures do notice and remember who supports them. So again, I think all the more important for us to continue with, our PAC activities and be seen. With that said, I think that contributions, just a disclaimer that we have to share, they're not tax deductible. ASCO members, you have to be an ASCO member. In the US, we cannot take contributions from international members, unfortunately. and the rest of the disclaimers are there. So basically, I want to thank each and every one of you who have supported us last year and asking for support for the PAC this coming year. Our goal, as you saw earlier, was to try and raise $90,000 in this year, and we do need the support of each and every one of you to do that. So please consider making a contribution. This is how you can visit the PAC website. If you have any questions, Anthony Perez will be more than happy to assist you. And I think that about completes my little tome. And I would like to maybe introduce Dr. Andrew McKinney, who is ASCO's outside government relations individual, who will tell us a little bit about how we are reaching out to our elected officials. So Andrew, take it away. And thank you for the time to address you. Have a great meeting.
Thank you. Promoted me to doctor, so I'm actually just a lobbyist at this point. So thanks so much. I think there's some slides that you're going to pull up, and basically what I've been asked to do is come give a little bit of a lay of the land of what's going on in Washington, how things might impact some of the priorities ASCO is working on. Right now, I mean, there are sort of two undeniable, indistinguishable facts that are influencing every policy decision on Capitol Hill right now. One is just kind of how tight the margins are in Congress. Right now, obviously, there's a 6-seat majority in the House for Democrats. It's 50-50 in the Senate with the vice president breaking ties. So, it's pretty much the tightest it's been in about 20 years, which, as you can imagine, for somebody like Chuck Schumer or Nancy Pelosi, who has to wake up every day and get things done, the ability to get everyone in her conference or his conference to agree is extremely challenging. So, as you can imagine, very diverse conference where you have everyone in the Senate from a Joe Manchin to a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren. Getting them all unified is challenging, and Nancy Pelosi certainly has that challenge in the House as well. So that's really making things difficult for Democrats to get things done. And on top of that, Republicans either on a policy level don't really disagree or agree with Democrats on a lot of things they're trying to get done, or as we get closer to the election, it gets harder to stomach. Republicans giving Democrats a win gets harder to stomach. So both of those factors are weighing heavily on the legislative agenda. The other thing that is just a critical factor to keep in mind is we are only 216 days, and I say only, but it'll fly by until Election Day. And I think, again, Republicans feel like they have the winds at their back. They feel very good about their prospects, and there's a lot of factors that are working in their favor. One is just history. Typically, the party in power does lose seats during the first midterm election, usually on average of about 30 seats. So if you look at the current margins, it's a pretty easy pickup in the House and the Senate for Republicans if that trend holds. You also got some factors that are working against Democrats, whether it's Biden's approval rating at about 41, average about 41.5%. And that's only 1.5 points higher than Trump was at this point in his presidency. And Trump lost 30 seats and 36 seats in 2018. So history, unpopular president, we may agree with him or not, but his poll ratings or his approval ratings is certainly a drag right now. Just a really difficult environment for Democrats, whether it's COVID, obviously the war in Ukraine has sidelined a lot of their domestic legislative agenda, inflation, some of these are just bad luck. And so they're also facing those as they go into Election Day. So all this is to say it makes it very difficult to get legislation passed right now. But I do think we have some issues that really have some opportunities. So why don't we go into the next slide? The other factor that's just really important to keep in mind is the calendar. Typically, Congress at least does the bare minimum, kind of what they have to do. So we always try and keep a close eye on the calendar, what's expiring, what has to get done. As you can see, I feel like we're in a mall. You are here in April. Coming up, I think we do have some opportunities in September with the expiration of government funding. You also have the FDA user fee agreements expiring at the end of September. Those often become Christmas trees where other legislative items get attached. So, I think that will be a key date to keep an eye on, that September 30th date, for some opportunities to get some of our priorities included. Also, we'll talk about it more in a second, but Democrats, I think, will make another attempt at a more comprehensive reconciliation bill, something they've been working on for over a year and have had a challenge in getting there. But they do feel like this May, June will provide another opportunity to do something in reconciliation, which could have major impacts for some of the areas that we care about. Also, there's always opportunities in a lame duck session. This is that period after the election before the next Congress starts. You've kind of gotten the politics behind you. There are some opportunities also to legislate there. So, keeping an eye on the calendar and really thinking about where are our sweet spots or where are there opportunities to plug our issues in is really important as you think about the current legislative strategy and landscape. Next slide. So, I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about what are the general congressional priorities, and then also what are some of ASCO's priorities. Obviously, everyone's aware there's a Supreme Court confirmation process going on right now. 3 Republicans this week announced they would be supporting Judge Jackson, and so her confirmation is all but assured, and should happen by the end of this week. That's a big deal. Obviously, the court will still be a 6-3 court, but to have a new justice there and have Democrats being able to campaign on that is important. So that will happen this week. There was hope last night that they would be putting together a $10 billion COVID package. There was an agreement on the package, but unfortunately, sometimes process gets in the way, and there was a disagreement on amendments. So as of now, there will not be a COVID bill. The White House has said they need a new influx of money, but they're going to have to continue to work on that one. There's a China competitiveness bill they're working on. There will be continued efforts to support the Ukraine, whether it's through sanctions, funding. So that will be another thing that will take up a lot of attention. We talked a little bit about reconciliation. Joe Manchin has made it clear, and I don't want to make it sound like he's the most important person in Washington, but his comments are certainly the ones that get the most attention in the press. But he has made it clear he'd like to make another run at reconciliation. This would be probably a scaled back version of what Democrats have been talking about historically, but for our purposes, still could be major impacts on drug pricing. I think there's a good chance that they attempt to extend ACA subsidies or enhance subsidies. So that's an area where we'll have to be keeping a close eye on it. And as I said, Joe Manchin gets a lot of attention. There are other senators. There were some press reports this morning that Kristen Sinema from Arizona also has some concerns that will need to be addressed. So certainly no guarantee that gets done, but I do think there will at least be another run at it in the coming weeks and months. FDA user fee reauthorization. That has to happen. It's something that, if not, the FDA basically shuts down. So that will happen. It's already in process, but something that will get wrapped up over the summer and will need to be completed by September 30th. Government funding also needs to happen by September 30th. And then there's a real push right now to do something around mental health. I think COVID and the pandemic and isolation has sort of really raised a lot of attention and awareness around mental health needs, the lack of mental health workforce, opportunities to use telemedicine. So I do think mental health is another area where you could see some legislating. So when you look at ASCO's priorities, whether it's prior authorization or telemedicine, both those, I think on prior authorization, thanks to a lot of work from the people on this call, but other organizations, you're up to about 276 co-sponsors on the bill, very bipartisan, a lot of support. I think that's one that's still, I think staff is working on it, but I do think continuing to push that co-sponsor number list up with the meetings you have this week and continuing to push for that. I do think that there's a growing sentiment of something has to happen there. So I think there's a good opportunity there. Telemedicine is going to be somewhat dictated by the current public health emergency. A lot of the current flexibilities are only in place during the public health emergency. In my opinion, the emergency is going to probably continue past July. It's coming up for renewal, and I think will at least be extended through July and possibly beyond that. But I think as it gets closer to that public health emergency expiring, there's going to be an even greater push to make sure some of the progress that we made in telemedicine is here to stay. So I think there will be a strong push for that in September, if not in lame duck. Cancer research funding, another area where I think the September 30th government funding package will be obviously the area of focus. So we'll have some opportunities there. And then diversity in clinical trials, a lot of attention there. I think ASCO's done some great work on this issue in the past, and on Medicaid Medicaid diversity issues. And so I think the diversity in clinical trials bill is really well teed up to be part of the discussion during the FDA user fee debate in September. So all that is to say, I do think when you look at ASCO's priorities and what the congressional priorities are, there are some really good opportunities. So I think your timing for being here is great. Your timing to really push for these things is good. So why don't we go on to the next slide, and I'll wrap up. Just as I talked about in the beginning, legislating is very challenging. I think last year there were about 10,000 bills introduced, and close to about 100 of them actually become law. So you can imagine how difficult it is to get a bill passed. So a lot of times what we also make sure we focus on is the regulatory area. What is the administration? What can they do through rulemaking and not through Congress? And these are some areas where we're seeing a fair amount of attention by the administration right now, areas where they're really focused on and have some administrative flexibility. One is going to be continuing to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. I think there was certainly a hope when Biden took office that we would be well beyond this by now, but obviously that's not the case. So issues like the public health emergency and figuring out when that expires and how do you take some of the flexibilities. I mean, that is going to be extremely complicated to disentangle from that, given how many different flexibilities are tied to that PHE. So that's one that's taking up a lot of bandwidth inside the administration. Implementing the infrastructure bill that passed recently. A lot of people may forget there was $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. So that one is gonna take up a lot of again bandwidth in the administration. Implementing that, getting money out the door. Promoting health equity is something that every issue in the healthcare space is going through that lens right now. I think it's a top priority for everyone in Congress and the administration. And so I think promoting health equity is going to be one that they will continue to look for opportunities. Just in last night's Medicare Advantage rule, there was some stuff around star ratings and how they're rating health plans on issues around health equity. Lowering the cost of prescription drugs. I talked about the reconciliation bill and the push there to do stuff around drugs in legislation. If that does fall apart, I fully expect the administration will revisit what they can do through demonstration projects and the Medicare Innovation Center and other areas. So that issue is not going away by any stretch, even if they can't come to a legislative agreement on it. And I think it will be something that Congress is very focused on. But if they can't pull it off, the administration will certainly spend some time on it. Expanding access and coverage to care. Big event yesterday at the White House. Obama was back in the building for the first time in quite a while, I think about 5 years, and was back to talk about the ACA, the successes there, the importance of extending some of these enhanced subsidies, fixing some of the issues that have come up over the years. So ACA and coverage, whether it's in ACA coverage or Medicaid, is really taking up a lot of the focus and something that the administration feels really good about continuing to push. And then I think it's not lost on a lot of people that Medicare is continuing to go broke. I mean, we have not done much to actually lower the cost of healthcare generally. So I think there's this looming issue out there of, what do we do to extend the life of the Medicare Trust Fund? And so I think that is something that we're probably not there yet, where we're going to have an entitlement debate. But as we get closer to 2026, when the current trust fund is set to expire, I think there will be some conversations about how to continue to make sure that benefit is there for seniors. So Obviously, a lot going on. Going back to kind of what I said earlier, I do think you guys are here at the right time. Your issues, I think there are a lot of opportunities, and yeah, looking forward to continuing to work with you and being in some of your meetings tomorrow.
Save questions.
Okay.
And
Yeah, happy to answer questions when I know some came up in the chat, so happy to answer questions when it's appropriate.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. I will move on to going through your online scheduling platform. So once again, thank you, Andrew. I'm Ryan Strandlin. I am ASCO's grassroots advocacy specialist. You may recognize my name from the ACT network or the Advocacy at Home emails that you receive. As Dr. Burr said, we're really looking forward to today and tomorrow for your congressional meetings. And I'm going to spend the next few minutes going through the online scheduling platform with you and how to navigate that. First, a few reminders. You are all muted, but we're certainly eager to take your questions, which if we take any questions verbally, we will take those at the end. If you do have any questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Pose your question to all panelists. And our lobbyists and advocacy staff will try and get to as many as those in the allotted time as possible. We may save some for the end and pose those questions to the group. And if your question is not answered in the allotted time, ASCO advocacy staff will follow up via email. We understand some of you may not be able to attend all the live events over the next 2 days or may not be able to stay for the entire time. Very understandable with your schedules. This training and the first 30 minutes of the grassroots training with Rashna Chowdhury are being recorded, and you can view them at your convenience prior to tomorrow's meetings in the resources tab on the scheduling website, and I will show you where that is, and we will be sending out an email this evening as well. I would like to highlight the grassroots training with Rashna Chowdhury that will occur after this session at 4:45. She is a best practices. So Rashna will provide best practices and tips for successful meetings. And then we will have breakout groups based on your meeting groups for tomorrow. We encourage you to join this as it's a great opportunity to talk and strategize with your team through your meetings before tomorrow. And joining on a laptop is certainly preferred for this. Just a reminder, most of your meetings tomorrow will take place via Zoom. Many congressional staff opt to dial in as audio only, as many of them work in shared spaces, small apartments, things of that nature. But members of Congress are more willing to use video, so please use video where you can. For most meetings, your online schedule will include a Zoom link. When you join each congressional meeting, check that your camera is on. While not everyone you meet with will turn on their cameras, it will improve your virtual meeting experience to see each other. We know a few congressional offices will opt to use their own conferencing services, and those dial-ins will be provided in your schedules. So your congressional meetings are on a website accessible via desktop, tablet, or mobile. To access your schedule, please click on the link provided in the email that you received on Friday, April 1st from advocacyday@advocacyassociates.com. Once you click on the link, you will use the username, which is your email that you use to register for the event, and the temporary password they provided. Once you are logged in, you will then be prompted to create your own password for the platform. If you forget your password, please use the forgot your password link to reset your password. And if you're still having trouble logging in after that or unable to find your password, in the upper left-hand corner, you will find a support button and you can contact Advocacy Associates for more help. So once logged in and viewing your schedule, you will see the list of lawmakers you will be meeting with. The time for each meeting is located on the right-hand side and is listed in Eastern time. We've requested meetings with all of your members and senators. You might also notice some members and senators that aren't yours on your schedules. Keep in mind, this is because you've been paired with advocates from other locations in your state or in neighboring states. Some of your meetings might show TBD, as you see on this screen, but you will only participate in confirmed meetings. Certainly as your schedule is fluid, as are all schedules on Capitol Hill, please be sure to check your schedule consistently to make sure that you find any changes. If there are any last minute changes to your schedule, you will get an email day of. And if you are unable to, or if you have any questions, I apologize, on your schedule, please email advocacysummit@asco.org. So if you click on each meeting to access additional information, below the lawmaker's name, you can see who from that meeting in the office you will be meeting with. For many of you, this will be the lawmaker's staff. Their name will be listed here, but if the member is joining you, their name will be listed as well. The green join button meeting is how you will join each of the meetings, and if necessary, the dial-in information will be located below that. Please try and join each meeting 5 minutes early with your group, just to strategize who will be going through what prior to each meeting. Reminder to keep yourself muted. As we all know, we've been on Zoom for quite a long time now, so to avoid any background noise. To the right of the member's name, you will find key talking points for each of your meetings. These are the same ones provided in your e-binder. If the member of Congress is a co-sponsor of any of the bills that we are asking for, you will see a thank you, as you see on the screen. Thank you for co-sponsoring each of those bills. And we have included that note that says thank you. If you see talking points here that begin with thank you, please be sure to thank them for co-sponsoring the bills, which we are advocating for. You will also notice here if your lawmaker sits on a committee that has jurisdiction over health issues. Alternatively, some of you may not see any notes here, which just indicates that your lawmaker has not co-signed any of the bills we are advocating for and do not sit on any of those committees. The lack of the notes does not reflect your lawmaker's position on these issues. It simply means you have a great opportunity to educate your lawmaker on the issues. Below the talking points are links to each of the documents that were also provided in your e-binder, including the key messages chart, the suggested meeting script, and leave behinds that have been sent to your offices prior to your meeting, so no need to worry about that. We all know the virtual meetings present unique challenges because the ability to read body language is a little difficult, so that's why we created a script that may help you through your meetings. Of course, please be sure to use this as a guide and certainly personalize these wherever possible. Moving down the right-hand column under attendees, you can see who else will be joining you in each of your meetings. You do have the capability to chat individually with those other volunteers directly in your meeting, directly on the scheduling platform by clicking on the bubble on the right-hand side. Alternatively, each attendee's email address is listed as well, and you can also find that in the directory, so you can get in touch with them. Hopefully all attendees will join a few minutes early, as I mentioned before, but once the member of Congress or their staff joins the video, please be sure to get started as to not impede on their time. Any late attendees can jump on when it's appropriate. Some states with a large number of volunteers are separated into smaller groups for meeting with your representatives, but a larger group will come together for meetings with your senators. So please be prepared for some larger meetings with your senators. Likewise, if you are the only participant from a state, you may be paired with somebody from a different state. I recommend that you check the attendees in each of your meetings to see who you expect in each of your meetings. On the lower left-hand side of the appointment, you will find a button labeled Send Thank You Note. For each of your meetings, there is a pre-drafted customizable thank you note with the correct staffer's name and email address. We strongly encourage you to send a thank you note to reflect, personalized to reflect your discussions. These thank you notes are a great way to offer yourself as a continuous resource for that office's for anything cancer care related moving forward. Your feedback on your meetings really helps ASCO lobbyists follow up with congressional offices and with our advocacy work moving forward. Using the survey button found by clicking the meeting report form button, please note where the lawmaker stands in each of the issues, what follow-up is needed, and whether the member asks for any additional material to be sent for them. If you have any connections with an office, this is a really good place to note that for us. And if they have any special connection with cancer care, please be sure to capture that in your feedback. In the toolbar above the schedule, you have access to a few more items that will be helpful during the summit. The legislators tab has information on each of the members that you'll be meeting with, including their biography and their committee assignments. We've also listed the important committees for ASCO and the talking points. The messages tab will allow you to access any conversations that you are having with other members that are attending the summit. You can access the list of attendees via the directory button that includes their name, institution, and email address. For questions on your schedule or the meeting portal itself, please click the support tab. You can also email advocacysummit@asco.org with any questions. And the More tab on the right-hand side includes additional resources, and we will be posting the recordings from these meetings in the More tab under additional resources. Just a few tips for your meetings. You should expect these to be about 15 to 30 minutes, but it really depends on how much time the office has. You know, if they're running late, there's votes, things of that nature. They may be longer or shorter due to staff availability. You might be scheduled to speak with the member of Congress or senator. Your schedules can change last minute, so please be sure to know that if they do have to step out, it's not a reflection of how they feel about the group. They're just pulled in so many different directions. You know, it is really all that more important to convey your message to the staff member so they can, you know, talk to their boss about that. Most of you will not have an ASCO staffer in your meetings. In a few cases, an ASCO staff will be joining you. If this is the case, it will be noted in the attendees section. As a reminder, in the next section, we will have breakout set up for participants to meet with your groups to strategize prior to your meetings. Like I said, this is a great opportunity for you to speak with your other team members before tomorrow and decide, you know, who will open each meeting, who is best suited to speak on each of the legislative issues prior to your meetings tomorrow. Additionally, please be sure to join your meetings early, as I mentioned, so you can possibly, you know, just recap with your team quickly who will go through what. I apologize. My talking points are on top of the microphone. As you can see, the sausage being made behind the scenes. I am actually running the Zoom as well, so I thank you for letting me know. And I apologize on the last screen. Just wanted to make sure that we all know that a constituent opens up the meetings if there is only one constituent in that meeting group. Finally, social media. We encourage you to highlight the Advocacy Summit on social media and amplify your virtual presence on Capitol Hill. Your e-binder included a one-pager with social media tips and best practices, including some sample tweets. Some options are, you can also take selfies with the card that were included in your swag box that should have arrived by Monday that says, I advocate for. You could take a selfie in front of your computer as well, but any way that you can highlight the summit using the hashtag ASCO Advocacy Summit. Just a reminder not to record your congressional meetings, but if they do give you permission to take a screenshot of your congressional meeting with a member of the staffer, you're certainly welcome to do that and post those. And if you do take any photos of that nature, please send them to us at advocacysummit@asco.org because we love getting information like that so we can share that as well. If you have any questions about accessing your meeting schedule or any of the trainings today, just a reminder to please ask those in the chat function. We'll respond over chat or take them at the end of this training. So thank you very much. I will now turn it over to Dr. Julie Vose, who will start our legislative messaging.
Thanks very much, Ryan. So today we're going to talk about some of the goals that we're going to be here for and what we're here to talk about with our Congress and build relationships with our lawmakers and their staff. Can I have the next slide, please?
Absolutely.
So just a reminder and to talk about an outline of our goals for the next 2 days. First and foremost, we're here to build relationships with our lawmakers and their staff. Sometimes the staff are more important than lawmakers because they actually represent what we talk about to the staff members at a later point in time. We're here to represent ASCO as a strong, unified thought leader on cancer issues, the thought leader. We're here to reinforce the messages that ASCO has delivered on our behalf, putting a constituent voice to those messages. And as we heard earlier today, it's really important as a constituent to talk to them, to tell them what's important to us. We're here to present ourselves as a resource for any cancer issues that may come across their desks, reminding the offices that we are the experts on cancer care. And ASCO is available to provide assistance and insight into how different policies affect cancer care. Next slide. It's truly important that our advocacy efforts don't begin and end at the summit. We need to continue the dialogue with our lawmakers year-round and at home. And ASCO has a robust advocacy program at home, which many of us have participated in, which has been an ongoing virtually during the pandemic. It's all been difficult for us to continue that, but I think the effort's really been worth it. We're conducting our Advocacy at Home program as a virtual and in-person hybrid event, depending on the state, the lawmakers' comfort level, and your comfort level. I encourage you to reach out to ASCO staff on how to continue your advocacy efforts year-round. Next slide. Before my colleagues and I review our legislative asks for tomorrow, I'll take 1 minute to explain how we arrived at each of these this year. And like Ryan said, it's kind of a sausage making behind the scenes, and as far as trying to decide which ones we're going to ask, because there's so many. The Government Relations Committee considers many factors when identifying asks for the Advocacy Summit, including timing, priority, and our ability to influence an ongoing issue. Our asks were chosen because they were issues ASCO members care about that impact the way we care for our patients and have some momentum in Congress this year. While ASCO's lobbyists are regularly communicating with the Hill and advocating on our behalf, it's critical that lawmakers hear from us as their constituents who are facing these issues every day. You also can be a voice for our patients who are their constituents as well. You'll notice that the messages related to the ongoing pandemic may be woven into each of these asks, as the pandemic, unfortunately, is still impacting our work as providers, researchers, and of course, our patients. Next slide. So I do want to remind everybody that we should stay nonpartisan. ASCO is a nonpartisan organization, and we should be respectful of that during our summit events. We are, after all, here to represent our patients, our practice, and our research, which has no partisanship. Next slide. Now, without further ado, we'll dive into our asks for tomorrow. We've bucketed them into 4 asks, and we whittle these down from a number that we considered. And we'd like to convey support for multiple bills in those 4 asks. First, support access to timely, quality care by co-sponsoring the Seniors Timely Access to Care Act and Safe Step Act. And second, permanently extending waivers for use of telehealth by co-sponsoring the Telehealth Modernization Act and the Connect Act for healthcare. And third, support increased access to clinical trials by co-sponsoring the Diverse Trials Act. And fourth, supporting, of course, as we always do, robust funding for increases in support of the NIH and NCI specifically. As Ryan mentioned, we have provided a suggested script to aid in your discussions with your meeting group and to have seamless meetings. Of course, we want to be sure that you add your own stories about yourself and your patients to the conversations, but there's scripts available to help you with some of the background for these bills that we're having asked about. Hopefully you'll be able to read the background information on these bills prior to the training, but if not, I encourage you to refer back to the Advocacy Summit e-binder for more of these informations. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Weston to review our first ask.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. And as you mentioned, the pandemic we all wish was over. Unfortunately, in Texas, we relaxed our mask mandates in schools a couple of weeks ago, and I've got 3 kids in schools and am now suffering my own personal consequences of the pandemic, having tested positive for COVID earlier this week, but thankfully minimal symptoms and hopefully resolving that soon. So it's my honor today to present the first 2 bills that we're going to talk about with our legislators tomorrow. And as Dr. Bose mentioned, this is the Safe Step Act and then the Timely Access to Care Act. So the first part has 2 asks, and these are familiar to those that have participated in the summits before. Chances are familiar with utilization management tools like step therapy and prior authorization, as well as the challenges they can cause for our patients in getting the right therapy at the right time. Step therapy, also known as STEP protocol or fail first, is a utilization management technique used by health plans to control costs. Step therapy requires a patient to try and fail a payer-preferred treatment or medication before the payer will agree to pay for the treatment prescribed by the patient's doctor, which might be great for GERD or for high blood pressure, not so great for cancer patients where we don't often get multiple bites at the apple for a good response. Typically, the payer preferred drug is less costly, but not always the best option for patients. And that, as I mentioned, is specifically true for our unique vulnerable cancer patient population. Next slide. It's important for you to emphasize the patient impact when discussing step therapy with lawmakers and their staff. Use of step therapy protocols can result in delays in access to timely care, which can cause disease progression, irreversible damage to patient health, reduction in overall quality of healthcare, increased burden on the patient and the provider, a deterioration of trust in the overarching provider-patient relationship, and an increase in healthcare costs in some cases where a patient's condition is actually worsened because of the step therapy. Overall, for the reasons listed on this slide, ASCO strongly believes that step therapy is inappropriate for cancer care, and this has been a frequent ask at previous summits. We're going to continue to emphasize this until we get this over the goal line. Next slide. Step therapy, as we've mentioned on the previous couple slides, is a common tool used to allegedly control costs. So we've been working with those in the community and champions on Capitol Hill on an incremental approach to protect our patients from these harmful policies. The Safe Step Act seeks to implement guardrails when step therapy is utilized by amending the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, which covers private, federal regulated group insurance plans to establish exceptions to step therapy protocols in 5 specific instances. 1, if the treatment's contraindicated. 2, if the treatment is expected to be ineffective. 3, if the treatment is likely to cause an adverse reaction. 4, if the treatment is expected to decrease the patient's ability to perform daily activities. And 5, if the patient is stable based upon the prescription drug already selected by the provider. So these are all reasons for this to have an exception. The bill also requires group health plans to implement a clear, easy to follow process for providers to access the step therapy exception when it's needed. The Safe Step Act enjoys broad support in the medical and patient communities, and some of this is due in part to previous advocacy efforts from those like you joining our call today and tomorrow with our members of Congress. Next slide. In the House, the Safe Step Act, HR 2163, is led by Representatives Raul Ruiz, who's a physician member of Congress from California, Brad Wenstrup from Ohio, Lucy McBath from Georgia, and Marionette Miller Meeks from Iowa. Reps Ruiz and Miller Meeks are physicians, and Rep Wenstrup is a doctor of pediatric medicine. Rep McBath is a breast cancer survivor. So all of them have significant interactions with the healthcare system, either professionally or personally, that has led them to have a particular interest in helping fix this problem for cancer patients. Right now, there are 115 bipartisan co-sponsors and advocates like you are working to add more. Be sure to check tomorrow if your person you're meeting with is already a co-sponsor. It's a great opportunity to thank them for their commitment to patient care. And if they've not yet had the opportunity to become a co-sponsor, we can work to convince them that that's the right course of action for their constituents. Next slide. In the Senate, the counterpart bill is Senate 464, which is introduced by Senators Murkowski and Bill Cassidy, who's a gastroenterologist from Louisiana, Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire, Cindy Hyde-Smith from Mississippi, and Jackie Rosen from Nevada. The Senate bill has a total of 31 bipartisan co-sponsors, nearly a third of the Senate. And many of the staff tomorrow you meet with will have heard of around the concerns of step therapy. This is probably not new information, but again, we need to keep beating the drum until we can get this actually through Congress to become legislation. Next slide. So to boil this down, tomorrow we'll ask our lawmakers to co-sponsor the Safe Step Act. If they're already co-sponsors noted on your online scheduler through the Advocacy website, please thank them for the support. And if not, it's an opportunity for us to get them to join the growing number of bipartisan supporters, both for the House legislation, HR 2163, or the Senate legislation 464. And as mentioned before, tell your story. If you've got a particular adversely impacted by step therapy, it's really important to have that personal anecdote about a brief bio of something memorable about the patient, and then about how their care was impacted by this adverse process. That does carry weight. People who work in Congress are human beings, and they remember anecdotes just like all of us do. So telling your story really is an important part of advocacy for ASCO. Next slide. Another familiar topic, the second part of this ask relates to prior authorization. Next slide. Prior auth requires patients or the providers to secure pre-approval as a condition of payment or insurance coverage of services. And most of you know this, unfortunately, all too well, what prior auth means in terms of the burden that it places on the healthcare system. Next slide. In 2017, 75% of oncology practice surveyed by ASCO cited prior authorization as a significant practice pressure, and the other 25% must have been asleep that day when they did not cite that. I'm just kidding, but clearly a big problem for the vast majority of our members. In 2021, a survey led by the AMA practices reported an average of 41 prior auth requests per week, accounting for approximately 13 hours or nearly 2 business days worth of time consumed by the medical staff. Prior auth practices often delay access to cancer care. Treatment delays are particularly harmful for patients with cancer because they can lead to serious complications, irreversible disease progression, or other terrible things that are really unfortunate and unfair to our cancer patients. In a survey by the American Cancer Society Action Network, 1 in 3 patients and caregivers reported delay in care because of prior authorization. And then last data point, in an AMA survey, 93% of respondents reported care delays due to prior authorization. Next slide. Trying to step into this breach is the Improving Seniors Timely Access to Care Act, HR 3173, and the companion bill in the Senate, S 3018. This protects patients from unnecessary delays in care by streamlining and standardizing prior authorization under the Medicare Advantage program. It does this by creating an electronic prior auth process to eliminate inefficient communication methods currently used, such as faxes, providing real-time decisions for items and services that are routinely approved. We all have had the experience of a prior auth for something that we know is FDA approved that we use all the time, and it still has to go through these ridiculous channels of being on hold forever just to get the approval we know we're going to get. Having electronic versions of that would be much streamlining of this burden. Next, it holds plans accountable for the timeliness of determinations and requiring rationale for denials. It improves transparency for requiring plans to report to CMS on the extent of their prior authorization use and the rate of approvals and denials. Ryan, if you can go back one slide, I think we jumped ahead one. And lastly, it prohibits additional prior auth for medically necessary services performed during invasive procedures that have already received or did not require initial prior authorization. So effectively, it's sort of going at the inefficiencies that we know exist and trying to figure out ways to make it more fair, more equitable for our patients and for our staff. Next slide, please. The Improving Seniors Timely Access to Care Act in the House is led by Representative Susan DelBene from Washington, Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania, Ami Bera, who's a physician member of Congress from California, and Larry Bouchon, who's also a physician member of Congress from Indiana in the House. There are in the House 276 bipartisan co-sponsors. 276 is a lot. So this has already gotten a lot of traction from both parties in the House, and hopefully we can get remaining members we meet with tomorrow to consider signing on as a co-sponsor. In the Senate, the companion legislation S3018 is led by Senator Roger Marshall, a physician member from Kansas, Kristen Sinema from Arizona, John Thune from South Dakota, and Sherrod Brown from Ohio, where it has 23 bipartisan co-sponsors. So nearly a quarter of the Senate's already signed on to this. So clearly a lot of traction. Next slide. In the House, we'll ask our members to co-sponsor the Improving Seniors Timely Access to Care Act, HR 3173. And if our members are already a co-sponsor, which is very possible with the huge number of co-sponsors that exist, we will thank them for their support and ask them to recommend to their colleagues to consider signing on as well. In the Senate, the ask is the same. The bill is 3018. And we've got about a quarter of the Senate signed on, so we can encourage those that have not yet done so to join this momentum that's growing. Next slide. So telling our stories, I know we've mentioned this multiple times because this really does matter. It sounds kind of hokey to tell a story about your patient that had the bad thing happen, and does this really matter to the staffer who's just writing down a few, crib notes to pass on to the member before they run to the next meeting? It does. The staffers remember things just like we do in terms of anecdotes. So tell your story, both about the Safe Step Act, about step therapy, how that's harmed your patients, and or prior authorizations, the burdens that placed on you and your practice. Step therapy prioritizations are issues where a story about a patient who is harmed by step therapy protocols or prior authorization delays can be incredibly compelling. And I urge everyone to think of stories you might be able to share tomorrow in our meetings, and perhaps figure out ahead of time with your team members who are going to be in the meeting who's going to share an anecdote for which one, and to kind of get it nailed down so it's ready for prime time. And with that, I will now turn it back over to Dr. Vose, who's going to review our telehealth acts.
Thanks, Jason. Next, we're going to talk about telehealth, and our next legislative ask involves telehealth and making some of the flexibilities in utilization and coverage of telehealth services under Medicare permanent after the public health emergency. As we all know, we've utilized this very well during the emergency, and it's been very successful, and we'd like to, of course, continue some of that success. Next slide. So this slide, I think, is very interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a dramatic uptick in the use of telehealth over conventional face-to-face visits. And of course, they were all useful to many of us as this became a way of life and trying to take care of our patients. Since then, as you can see on this slide, the use of telehealth has leveled off and dropped off. Patients and providers have found a balance between incorporating telehealth into patient care and continuing in-person visits. Certainly for some of our patients, really in-person visits are necessary for exams, for treatment, but for others, if we're just doing checkups on patients and don't necessarily need to do those things, is an excellent option. As many of us have experienced, there are a lot of benefits to telehealth. Certainly during the pandemic, it allowed us to consult with our patients without them having to come into the hospital or our practice, which is very important for our cancer patients who are immunocompromised and don't need to have excess risk to them. However, even before the pandemic, we saw an amazing benefit for patients when telehealth was offered as a vehicle of care. Next slide. Well, of course, it can't be used for every visit and every clinical situation. Telehealth increases access to our care for our patients by reducing treatment burden and travel burden in some cases, and distribution of the patient and caregivers, disruption of the patient and caregivers' lives. For example, in my state, which is a very rural state, we have been able to use telehealth in some circumstances to avoid patients traveling many hours to be seen. Providers who use telehealth have reported its benefits and include, in addition to decreasing travel time, immediate access to care, whereas they may not be able to have a caregiver close or see them for hours or days, earlier detection of health issues and complications of health issues or treatments that we're doing, increased patient autonomy, reduced caregiver burden, travel time, etc., and increased patient satisfaction and overall health. In chronic disease management, telehealth interventions have been shown to lead to a decline in hospital admissions and readmissions, length of hospital stays, emergency department visits, and a reduction in mortality. Next slide. So telehealth was originally identified as a solution exclusively for rural patients and has been used in that method for quite a number of years very successfully. Reimbursement was limited in the geographic sense that patients had to be that are federally designated as both rural and healthcare professional shortage areas. So in some states, the telehealth has been very successful for a long period of time for these reasons. Additionally, prior public health emergency, in addition to the prior public health emergency, Medicare only reimbursed telehealth services to beneficiaries when they were in a qualifying originating site, meaning a hospital or rural health clinic. They weren't to be in the patient's home. These two restrictions severely limited patients' ability to use telehealth in a very meaningful way. After the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services declared a public health emergency in response to COVID-19, many telehealth rules and restrictions were temporarily lifted, which were very beneficial to ourselves and our patients. Both the geographic and site origin restrictions were waived temporarily, allowing patients and providers to use this tool for healthcare delivery much more often. Since then, telemedicine or telehealth has become an important healthcare delivery tool during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has increased utilization and helped prevent care interruptions, minimize patient exposure to COVID-19, played an important role in flattening the curve in transmission and mortality, and allowed additional and convenient access for underserved populations. Next slide. So the benefits of this expanded access to telehealth have not gone unnoticed by lawmakers, and they have been trying to figure out a legislative solution to ensure appropriate continued access permanently to this access that has been truly rare and bipartisan in some cases. Many bills have been introduced that approach this in different ways, and as we learned last year in the summit, there were a multitude of different healthcare modernization acts and other telehealth bills, but ASCO thoughtfully reviewed all of these, and we support two specific bills as the best options. The first one is the Telehealth Modernization Act, HR 1332 or S368, and the Connect for Health Act, HR 2903 or S1512. The Telehealth Modernization Act aims to continue this expanded access to telehealth by permanently removing the geographic and originating site restrictions that limit Medicare coverage before the public health emergency. That is, before it was only for rural sites and only in places that were healthcare providers. In the past, the bill would allow the patients with Medicare to continue their ability across telehealth services, regardless of their geographic location, and would no longer require patients to utilize these services in a doctor's office or a clinic or a hospital. Next slide. In the House, the Telehealth Modernization Act is led by Representatives Buddy Carter of Georgia and Lisa Blunt Rochester of Delaware. In the Senate, S368 is being led by Senators Tim Scott, Brian Schatz, and Janine Shahan. The bill has 19 Senate co-sponsors and 122 in the House. Next slide. We're also supporting the Connect for Health Act. The Connect for Health Act, as noted here in the House and in the Senate, would expand the use of telehealth services for Medicare beneficiaries by permanently removing the geographic and site restrictions, permitting remote patient monitoring, allow telehealth in community health centers and rural health clinics, and providing compensation for those services. It would give the Health and Human Services Secretary the authority to waive telehealth restrictions, including during public health emergencies. It would mandate studies of how telehealth has been used during the COVID-19 pandemic and the effectiveness of telehealth waivers, and encourage the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, CMMI, to test payment models that would include telehealth. Next slide. The House bill is led by Representatives Mike Thompson, David Schwiekert, and Bill Johnson, Doris Matsui, and Peter Welsh. And the Senate bill is led by Senators Brian Schatz and Roger Wicker. The bill has 62 Senate co-sponsors and 130 in the House. Next slide. Both bills enjoy bipartisan support and seem to have the political might to move forward this year. The Telehealth Modernization Act was included in the Cures 2.0 legislative package introduced by Representatives Deanna DeGette and Fred Upton, our two congressional champion for cancer care awardees this year. Hearing from the constituents really could put a push on this policy and that we need to make it over the finish line. If you successfully have utilized telehealth in your patients over the past 2 years, which almost all of us have, please tell your story, how that's been successful. and explain to the members why reverting back to restricted access would harm your ability to provide the best care to our patients. Our message to the House and Senate is, please co-sponsor the Telehealth Modernization Act and the Connect for Health Act and support permanent access to the use of telehealth services for patients and providers by permanently lifting geographic originating site restrictions. There is one question, however, that I came up with certainly when I read these was, unfortunately, these bills don't allow us to access telehealth services across state lines, and that is still an issue that we need to address in further legislation. Because the two restrictions we're discussing today, geographic and originating site, will be lifted, this could still be an improvement for our patients. We still need to push on the across state lines issue, however. If the office is already co-sponsoring for one or both of these bills, we want you to thank them for their support. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Carolyn Hendricks to discuss our two final asks.
Thank you, Dr. We're going to switch gears now. We're going to focus on a couple of issues related to cancer research. The first of these is asking for congressional support for the Diversifying Investigations via Equitable Research Studies for Everyone in Trials Act, which Congress refers to as the Diverse Trials Act, H.R. 5030 and Senate 2706. Next slide, please. Ensuring equitable access to clinical trials for every American has been one of ASCO's top advocacy priorities for a long time. For those of you who have participated in past advocacy summits, you'll remember the Clinical Treatment Act, legislation that ASCO championed, which was signed into law at the end of 2020, and now requires Medicaid to cover routine care costs for clinical trial enrollees. Now, all of our major payers are required to cover routine care costs, such as screening, laboratory tests, and physician visits. And the trial sponsors typically cover the investigational therapeutic or drug. But unfortunately, patients are still often left paying for ancillary costs that are incurred during clinical trial participation out of pocket. And that's the issue addressed by this bill. Next slide, please. Ancillary costs include transportation, lodging, potentially in a different city, meals, childcare that might be incurred when a patient must travel to a trial site, etc. These costs can be especially high for rural Americans who may live far from their trial sites, or when there's a need for more frequent clinical visits for additional trial-related treatment or monitoring. It's important to note that both the FDA and institutional review boards already have guidance allowing trial sponsors to cover these ancillary costs. But we've long heard from sponsors and outside groups who want to cover these costs that they're worried about incurring civil monetary penalties for inducement to get the patients to enroll. And that is the main impetus behind the Diverse Trials Act. This bill would clarify this guidance to permit adequate coverage of these ancillary costs. Additionally, the bill would allow trial sponsors to provide patients with the technology that might be necessary to facilitate remote participation in clinical trials. And it also requires the Department of Health and Human Services to issue guidance on how to conduct decentralized clinical trials in order to improve demographic diversity in clinical trial participation. Next slide, please. The Diverse Trials Act is being led in the House by Representatives Raul Ruiz from California and Larry Bucshon from Indiana, and on the Senate side by Senators Robert Menendez from New Jersey and Tim Scott from South Carolina. This is a new bill for us, which affords us a great opportunity to increase awareness and to gather support. And despite being new, this bill is now a part of the House and Energy and Commerce Committee legislative hearing last month, and that illustrates that this bill does have the potential to move. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, many of us know firsthand that clinical trial enrollment has been down over the past 2 years. Robust, diverse enrollment is essential to ensuring that the treatments that are developed will provide safe and effective treatment for all Americans. Even those not in the medical field have witnessed how important diversity in clinical trials has been during the development of the COVID-19 vaccines. And one recent study showed that 1 in 5 clinical trials fails even before it begins because of insufficient enrollment. This is an unsettling statistic, considering that cancer clinical trials enrollment may provide our cancer patients with the best possible treatment option. This is where we need to tell our stories. Have you had patients decline a clinical trial because of out-of-pocket costs? Have you struggled to enroll a diverse population on your clinical trials? If you're a rural provider, do you find that your patients are either unwilling or unable to participate because of the distance that they would need to travel to your trial site? I urge you to think about this today and tomorrow. And if you have a compelling story to share, that you use that during your meetings. Next slide, please. Tomorrow, we want to ask our lawmakers to co-sponsor the Diverse Trials Act, HR 5030 on the House side and Senate 2706. This will enable greater access to clinical trials for our patients, regardless of their economic means or their geographic location. And if they were already a co-sponsor, make certain that you thank them. Next slide, please. Our final request for Congress is to support increased federal funding for the NIH and the NCI for fiscal year 2023. And before we dive into these asks, I'm going to spend a few minutes providing background on the appropriations process. You don't need this in detail for the meetings, but it is a background. Next slide, please. The House and the Senate both have appropriations committees, and those committees in turn have 12 subcommittees. And these are the committees that are responsible for setting annual funding amounts for all the discretionary governmental programs and their related agencies. One subcommittee that's tasked with funding both the NIH and NCI, among other agencies from a pool of designated funds, is the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Subcommittee, often referred to as Labor HHS for short. Every year, the President releases a proposed annual budget. These budgets are not binding. They provide a framework for Congress. President Biden just released his fiscal year 2023 budget on March 28th. We aren't going to be incorporating his budget into our legislative asks for tomorrow, but we do feel it's important to share the funding for the NIH and NCI that was incorporated in the budget, which are not what we had hoped to see. The President has proposed flat funding for NIH for fiscal 2023 and actually proposed a cut for the NCI. ASCO has communicated its concern about this directly with the administration already, and we will be following up with key congressional offices regarding this budget. But for tomorrow, we're mentioning this as background in case it is raised by your congressional offices. If that occurs, please feel free to let them know we've released a statement on the President's budget, and we would be happy to send it to them as follow-up. And please note this on your feedback form in the meeting app. This is to say that we're meeting with our lawmakers at a perfect time to really advocate for increases in funding. The appropriators are collecting their requests right now and will begin to work on their fiscal year 2023 funding allocations. Next slide, please. Let's turn to the specific asks. First of all, it's important to thank our members of Congress for the robust funding increases that NIH has received over the past few years. In fact, over the past 7 years, NIH has received increases totaling over $15 billion. And this is a strong testament to the bipartisan support that NIH has on the Hill, and as well as our commitment as advocates of NIH funding over the years. So you might wonder, why do we need to spend time tomorrow asking Congress for more funding if they have been receiving annual increases and enjoy strong bipartisan support? Well, the fact is the yearly support that we have is in part due to the engagement of the biomedical research and advocacy communities year after year. And this helps ensure that lawmakers will continue to prioritize research funding for NIH. Congress has a lot of competing priorities in terms of deciding what to fund. Hearing from a cohesive and persistent coalition of advocates on why NIH and NCI funding is so critical makes these decisions to fund the agencies easier. Next slide, please. We do want to start off acknowledging the support. You don't need to memorize the numbers, but for background, for fiscal year 2022, Congress provided the NIH with $45 billion in funding. And this reflected a $2.25 billion increase over fiscal year 2021. The NCI also fared particularly well, receiving a $6.9 billion allotment, which represented a $353 million increase in funding. And these increases are certainly something to be grateful for, but the fact is, the NCI's budget has not kept up with the scientific opportunities in the cancer research space. Next slide, please. Our growing understanding of cancer biology has led to unparalleled increases in R01 grant applications to the NCI. Between 2013 and 2019, grant applications to the NCI rose by over 50%. But at that same time, funding for the NCI only rose 20%. And because of that gap, the NCI was currently, at that point, able to fund only 11% of viable R01 grant applications. And this means that good science went unfunded. This graph shows where those pay lines have been since 2013 and where the NCI hopes to take them with enough funding over the next few years. Our fiscal 2023 request for NCI would allow them to fund 13% of these important grant applications. Next slide, please. An additional point to make about the importance of these increases to the NCI's baseline budget is that fiscal year 2023 was the last year of cancer moonshot funding. So in fiscal year 2023, it's authorized to receive $216 million, but in fiscal year 2024, it is authorized to receive no funding through Cancer Moonshot. Next slide, please. President Biden has announced that he'd like to reinvigorate the moonshot, but without congressional action, this additional source of money for NIH will in fact expire. So if you're able to during your visits, please remind congressional offices of this and convey ASCO's strong interest in working with both Congress and the administration to reinvigorate the moonshot. On this slide, you can see then Vice President Biden speaking on the launch of the original moonshot at ASCO's 2016 annual meeting, and then at the White House in February when President Biden announced his goal to reignite the moonshot. ASCO was present at that time. Our CEO, Dr. Cliff Huddis, was present, as well as Dr. Lori Pierce, who is current president of ASCO. So we do, past president at the time, we do have allies in high places, but you and I know we sound like a broken record, but we still cannot stress enough the importance of your stories as experts in this space. It's important to highlight to your lawmakers and their staffers that the advancements in your research and new treatments benefit our patients. Alternatively, if you have recently struggled to secure grant funding for research, that also creates a very compelling story. And essentially all the congressional offices will be highly interested in how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected your ability to do cancer research. Next slide, please. The actual funding request for fiscal year 2023, to establish those, ASCO's been working with the biomedical and cancer research communities to make sure that we present Congress with a unified ask and messaging. We're requesting that Congress provide $4.1 billion in terms of an increase in funding to the NIH for the fiscal year 2023 for a total of $49 billion. This would allow the NIH budget just to keep up with biomedical inflation and provide a meaningful growth rate of 5%. For the NCI, we're asking for a total of $7.76 billion. The NCI director, Sharpless, he's indicated that this is the amount that the NCI requires for fiscal year 2023 in order to continue the current momentum and to work towards realizing the NCI's mission. Next slide, please. Lastly, next slide. I want to mention the proposed Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, or ARPA-H. A lot of information has been swirling around on Capitol Hill, who is attempting to authorize the creation of ARPA-H and to provide it with adequate funding. And of course, ASCO has been heavily engaged in these efforts. As you heard earlier, we're excited about the agency's potential to tackle high-risk, high-reward translational medical research in areas including cancer. But one of ASCO's top principles for the proposed agency is that any federal funding for ARPA-H not detract from annual robust funding increases for both NIH and NCI. Currently, we don't have a specific funding request for ARPA-H, but we are working with the broader biomedical community to coalesce around a specific funding request. If your congressional offices specifically ask you about ASCO's position on ARPA-H or ask any detailed questions about funding for ARPA-H, please let that office know that ASCO staff will follow up with them. And again, note this in your meeting feedback. Next slide. So this is a quick recap of what we're asking our lawmakers to support tomorrow. There are a lot of asks on this page, but please remember that we're going to provide you with a lot of resources to assist you in your meetings, including a high-level key messages chart, some suggested scripting for your meetings, and one-pagers on each of the items. These can all be found on the site with your schedule. Next slide. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
If you have any further questions, please be sure to put those in the chat box at the bottom. I know that our advocacy staff has been answering questions throughout this entire presentation, and I believe that they may want to answer a few verbally as well, and I will be sure to allow them to speak as well.
Thank you all for submitting questions in the chat box. We have seen a few themes that have come up, so we'll try to answer as many of those questions in the few minutes that we have remaining. Just a quick aside, for those who haven't met me yet, I'm Christine Ruffner. I recently joined the ASCO Congressional Affairs team, so I'm so happy that you all are here and eager to participate. One of the questions that we've seen a couple times from folks have been around the Improving Seniors Timely Access to Care Act, or the Prior Authorization Bill, as well as the Safe Step Act, and why we've been advocating those for several years and what's going on and why aren't they moving. And so the short answer is there is a lot of movement, there is a lot of activity. We've seen huge amounts of co-sponsors on both of these bills. It's been a high priority for not only ASCO, but the physician community at large. There have been a few other priorities that have kind of been taking up the space in the room with the new administration, mostly the Build Back Better. You've seen the news over the course of the year that so much of the energy went into crafting that legislation, trying to push that through. It passed the House. Obviously, you saw what happened in the Senate. And so a lot of these good bipartisan bills that had so much support kind of got pushed to the back burner. We do think there is a good opportunity for these to move at the end of the year. I know Andrew had mentioned in his presentation earlier about some of the must-pass legislation in September. And so we'll continue to advocate for co-sponsors and hearings and move forward. But we are encouraged that this is moving forward. And if you have any specific questions about those bills, you can continue dropping them in the chat box and we'll answer them as we go. Turn it over to Kristen for some other questions.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, another question that we've gotten from a number of you has been around the differences between the Connect for Health Act and the Telehealth Modernization Act and why those two bills. So the short answer is our biggest request for Congress right now around telehealth is to remove the geographic and originating site restrictions for Medicare. Both of these bills would do that. The differences between these two bills are subtle. So the Connect for Health Act would lift the geographic and originating site restrictions, which Dr. Bose mentioned would allow patients that do not live in certified rural areas to utilize telehealth and allow them to utilize telehealth from places like their homes, and Medicare would reimburse. And then this bill also includes a few provisions that would address potential fraud and abuse within telehealth, providing additional funding and oversight for the Department of Health and Human Services. And then finally, this bill includes a couple provisions to collect data with use of telehealth in Medicare and encourages CMS to test telehealth models within Medicare. Meanwhile, the Telehealth Modernization Act lifts the geographic and originating site restrictions and allows other specialties like physical therapy and speech pathology to use telehealth, but does not include some of the fraud and abuse provisions from Connect. So a little bit different, but overall these two bills do very directly address the #1 issue that we're asking Congress to tackle. And I will turn it back over to Christine.
So another question around telehealth that we've been seeing a lot of is why these two bills. So for context, when all these restrictions were lifted with the pandemic, telehealth became the new trendy topic on Capitol Hill and everyone wanted a slice of it. So I think there are probably 30 members of Congress that have introduced telehealth legislation. Many of them have overlapping provisions. A lot of them have a lot of similarities and then little pieces that are different here and there. So we've been going through all of these bills, looking at the substance of the bills, looking at who are the bill leads, what committees do they serve on, what bills are likely to move. So we chose the Connect and the Telehealth Modernization Act because those two, they are introduced in the House and Senate already. They're both bills are receiving a lot of co-sponsors. There's a lot of robust support for them. And we're seeing that the bills in their entirety or provisions of those bills are being attached to bigger bills. For example, in the Cures 2.0 legislation that was introduced, it includes the Telehealth Modernization Act in its entirety. That is likely to be attached to some of the FDA user fee agreements that need to be passed by September. So we're looking at those opportunities. That said, I do think as things go forward, everyone wants to be part of the telehealth solution. And so we are actively engaging with members of Congress on the regular, asking them to work with stakeholders. We want to be part of the conversation so that we get this right. We know that there are some issues that might arise after some of this legislation passes, so we want to be engaged in that conversation. I'll ask Dr. Vose if she has anything additional that she would like to add here, or we can move to the next question.
I think we need to be very supportive of telehealth. It's something that's really helped our patients during this time period, and we want to continue to
I
move
don't know
forward.
if Dr. Vose is trying to speak.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, just wanted to say that telehealth has been so important to us and our patients during this time period. We want to continue to take it forward and support whatever we can. Thanks.
All right, sorry about that. So the next question, I know we're running short on time, so I think we'll ask one more that we're seeing in the chat and then turn it back over to Dr. Zahn to close out this training. One of the other questions we're seeing is around ARPA-H, moonshot funding, and NIH and NCI. So these things are all related. For our meetings tomorrow, we really do want to focus on requesting increases for baseline funding for NIH and NCI. Right now, those are still our priorities. We were really excited to hear about the reinvigorated moonshot, as Dr. Hendricks mentioned, but we are still kind of trying to figure out with Congress what that means, what the administration really wants that to look like. So we're asking for original moonshot funding. As Dr. Hendricks mentioned, this is the last year for that. And then baseline increases for NCI and NIH. In terms of messaging for ARPA-H, ASCO is supportive of the overall mission of ARPA-H to tackle high risk, high reward translational research projects. We have put out a set of principles that we would like to have both Congress and the administration keep take into consideration when they are both creating and funding ARPA-H. In terms of our meetings tomorrow, the #1 principle that we might want to convey to our lawmakers is that funding for ARPA-H really needs to supplement and not supplant NIH and NCI baseline funding. So we don't have a specific number to request for ARPA-H right now. We just want to make sure that whatever the funding is, wherever it lives, is in addition to robust increases to NIH and NCI. So I know that there are a couple other questions in the chat, and we will be following up directly over email for those. As always, feel free to reach out to staff and we'll get back to you before tomorrow. But otherwise, Dr. Bose, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. And thanks everybody for participating today. Before we conclude, a reminder that our summit programming will pick up after a short break. Our next event, our grassroots training on how to conduct successful meetings, will begin at about 4:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Please refer to your email or calendar appointment from ASCO to join the Zoom login. I highly encourage everyone to join live, as we will have state breakout sessions to strategize for our meetings tomorrow. If you have any questions about the virtual summit events or this webinar, please email advocacysummit@asco.org. Thanks everybody for attending.